You never, ever want to really disappoint your father. It's the Bob and
It's the Bob and
Sheri
Sheri
Oddcast, the
Oddcast.
Bob and Sheri Oddcast. Come on in, you'll have a blast with the Bob and Sheri Oddcast. Here's that'll disappoint him. Anyway, Father's Day, right around the corner, and I was thinking about it, and there was one instance where I was so ill at ease over something that happened, and I was afraid my father was going to find out. And I was a full-grown guy. Well, maybe not completely full-grown. I think, around 22 or 23, and I got my first really good radio job, and it was in Charlotte. And for some bizarre reason, my father uprooted the family and brought them to Charlotte, and he went to work for a basement waterproofing company, this national basement waterproofing company. And so I was kind of surprised. They were following me. And so I went over to meet him at the new job site that he had. And he took me around, and in the matter of a couple of weeks, he had become like the top salesman. He was a very good salesman. And one of the guys that he worked with, one of the other salesmen, and they would, sell a job to waterproof a basement of a house or a building or whatever that has leakage. And he introduced me to a guy named Jerry. And Jerry was his competitor in the office. Jerry would call in and see how many jobs my old man had sold during the week, because Jerry used to be number one. And my father told me this later, but I shook his hand, and very nice to meet you. Jerry was around 50, something like that. And my father was, I guess, around the same age, a little bit younger maybe. And so I met him one time. About 2 months later, one of the guys at the station, I think, was getting married or was leaving or something, and there was going to be a bunch of the station people who would take him out for the night. So I said, that's great. And I got in the car with somebody, and we went to a place that I'd never been before. I'd never been inside one of these places. And it makes me sound like a real namby-pamby, but I'd never been in a strip club before. And that's where they decided that we would go. And so I said, really? And I was single, the whole thing. I had nobody really in my life. So I wasn't worried about lying about it to somebody. And it was a different time. I mean, these days, a guy gets into the priesthood and they take him out to the strip club, and it's no big deal, right? But I'm exaggerating. But we went in there, and I guess we were in there for about 20 minutes, and I was having a beer, and I didn't even really drink at that point. But I figured, what am I going to do? Get a Shirley Collins here in a strip bar? And so I'm standing there nursing this beer, and I look up, and there's Jerry. And he made eye contact with me. And he's over in the part of the bar where the young women are doing the entertaining. I'm kind of, not in the shadows, but I'm at a table with these guys. And we made eye contact with one another. And I got sick to my stomach.
Because you didn't want him to go back and tell your dad that he had seen you at a strip club.
Exactly. Because my father was the kind of guy.
How else would we have met, Bob? I mean, that's where you rescued me,
I know, and you were one hell of a dancer, and they loved you. All I could think about was maybe he did go to one, or maybe he went to one. Maybe he was in the service. Maybe some shit went on that I don't know anything about. But certainly his persona was not that of a guy that would go to a strip club. I think he would think it was so, especially way back then. It would be so low class. And I was sick to my stomach. And I was going, give it a few days and then go see him and see if you can read it. And I went over to the apartment they were renting and walked in. And there was my mother and my sister and my brother and the old man. And he's sitting there reading the local newspaper and smoking a cigarette, which was the way it was a lot.
That was his cardio.
That exactly. And I go, how you doing? He goes, good. And I said, how's the new job? Everything, you getting along pretty good? Yeah, it's fine. I don't know how long I'm going to be with these people. I'm going to we're gonna move and go into competition with them or something. I don't know. I'm not going to be with these people long. And then I just hung around, and I don't think Jerry gave it up. I don't think he did. Whether it was
And
for whether he didn't want to tell my father for me or he didn't want anybody else to know he was at this cheesy, and it was a shitty little strip club.
so you don't
Um,
know to this day, you
no,
don't know if your dad.
I don't. I don't.
Interesting. Interesting. Let's pause here. We're talking about fathers and Father's Day and this idea of, did you disappoint your dad? Were you a disappointment to your dad? And I can't imagine that you in any way were ever a disappointment to your dad, Bob. I think he died so proud of you.
I think he did finally because I became successful, but I was a lousy student during his bankruptcy years where we were broke. I was, I was 15 years old. I was a pain in the ass, and then got married too young in his eyes, and had a child too young in his eyes. But then I got some traction, and it turned out that I started making more money than he was, and he had to come to me one time and ask for a loan. And that was a really shocking day in my life, by the way. I think I was
And
24 and I wasn't making a lot of money, but I had a couple of grand in the bank and he needed 1800 and I gave it to him.
it was
Um,
probably the most difficult, for a man who, as basically a teenager, fought the Nazis. That might have been one of the hardest things he ever had to do,
I
was
think you're
coming to
right.
you like that.
I
I
think you're
do.
right. And when he did, I was so surprised that I just blew it off. I said, "Of course, yeah, don't worry about it." And he made sure that I knew that I was going to be paid back. And I said, "We're not going to talk about that." And I just got on with talking with my mother and you know the visit, and he did pay me back. Um,
You, for me, fathers and Father's Day is just such a complicated.
sure,
It's a really complicated holiday,
right.
and it's a really complicated subject
Hmm.
because like I I had a very not good father, and he has his reasons. Like, he had a serious chronic mental illness that went undiagnosed until very late in life. My father had bipolar disorder, bipolar 2, the kind without the psychotic features, because he did so many illegal drugs that he had plenty of psychoses with that. He was a drug addict. He was a person completely devoid of empathy. He was emotionally and verbally abusive to my mother and myself, and emotionally and verbally and physically abusive to my brother. Like, he was not a good guy. And so for me, fathers, the whole idea of a father is like something out of fiction or fantasy. I did not succeed in giving my daughters a better ride than I had. So it's really, I'm fascinated by I'm fascinated by people that have good relationships with their dads, like Max with his dad, and I'm
Hmm.
fascinated by men that try so hard to be good fathers, like you. It's just like I'm watching some exotic animal in the wild that I know I cannot approach and pet, but it's endlessly interesting to me to watch the behavior.
Yeah, my relationship with him was interesting because he was a Yosemite Sam, and my mother figured out that I left very early, 16 and a half, just to get away. And I overheard her say that Bobby just knew that he had to get away. And I did. But later in life, I got a little bit of notoriety, and he was very, very proud. And I remember visiting their house. They got a little more successful. He got his own business started again. And I remember walking in there, and there was this radio pamphlet flyer with my picture on it. And all it was something to send out to advertisers. This is the guy that's on at night, and a little bit about him. And he had it framed and hanging on the wall in the kitchen. And I
Because
thought, oh,
he was so
wow,
proud of you. You
wow.
know, some of the things you've told me about your dad, your dad, like other members of that generation, your dad went from childhood to military service without really much in between. He was a teenage sergeant. I mean,
Right.
it sounds like a 50s comedy movie. I was a teenage sergeant, but he was.
Yeah. They moved them up
And
fast then.
they moved them up fast. We was the Second World War. The world was on
Yeah.
fire, and so your dad comes from, and this is not a slam on them. He comes from cold people. He comes from people that were not generous with their affections, not generous with their words, their affirmations. They were reserved people. They were cold. And if you listen to the regular Bob and Sheri show, you hear us talk about Shay Shay. Not a bad person, but not a warm person, not a demonstrative person. And so I think that your dad had things that he struggled with, but he loved you and was so proud of you. And you did something that's hard for dads, especially maybe dads of his generation. You basically said to your dad, who again was a teenage sergeant, you basically said to your dad, yeah, yeah, I'm going to be in show business. And your dad had no
No, it's
frame
true.
of reference for that. What kind of ridiculous ambition is that? Look where we come from. People like us don't go into show business. But you would not be stopped, and you persevered and you succeeded. And I bet if your dad would have had the words, cuz not everyone does. If he would have had the words to speak what was in his heart, he would have said to you, Bobby, you blow me away. You blow me away. I have not understood you since you were 11 years old, but I've always loved you, and you blow me away.
Here's how he did it. It was interesting. I was kind of a screw up, and we had next door neighbors who were very successful people, and they became one of my parents' few friends for a long period of time. They were brought down to the radio TV station I was working at, and he said, I'd like you to take Charles and Navard on a tour. And so I gave them the grand tour. Here's how the weatherman sets up for TV. And you can sit on the desk over here at the anchor's desk. And this is my studio over here. And this is my office. And we actually had a secretary. And this is my secretary, Lorraine. And so what it did was he was able to say to his friends, I know that you know that I blew it and that Bobby was really, off the rails, but he turned out okay, and I want you to see it. That's what he did. That is what was important to him. To I don't want to say save face, but I became like the face of the family that wasn't a screw up.
And isn't it wonderful to have that, to know?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Would you have loved like the Lifetime movie network scene where, Big Bob put his arm around you and said, son, you done good? Of course, like, wouldn't we all love that? But you often don't get that. Your dad was able to show you in other ways how he felt. And what's been interesting, because I've watched your kids grow up, your biological children and your bonus children. I've watched those kids grow up from babies. And I know that you have not always understood them either, but you learned something from your own experience in childhood. And that was how to hold the space for something you didn't understand. Like, I
right.
do not understand this. This makes no sense to me, but apparently this is who you are and what you're all about. And I'm just going to, kind of like leave a place open for you to do it. And that's the goal, right? That's what you're supposed to do. We all come through our own childhoods with some sort of baggage and wreckage. And
You
and
know
I
what
think
was
maybe the
really
best you can hope for is to be a little bit better than what you had.
Oh yeah, I mean that's definitely was my goal in life was to bring the family up another notch. I always think that's what everyone should do, and not just financially, but as far as people, as far as spirituality, as far as what you do helping others, as far as what you do to take care of yourself down the road, so you don't depend on anybody else, and get your kids a better education than you had. It was one of the most interesting things. At 16 and a half, I'm off out the door. I'm living in a slum in East Providence, Rhode Island. I'm not in college at that point, although I did get in eventually. But for all intents and purposes, I was kind of a lost soul that didn't, do the things that he thought a young man should do. Uh, Finish high school with high grades, get a scholarship into the University of Connecticut or wherever. That wasn't me. It was radio, rock and roll, craziness, marriage, kids. I mean, it was just all over the place. So at 16 and a half, I'm out the door. But you know what? 6 years later, I'm broadcasting from London, England, with some really interesting people as guests. And the broadcast is taking place on a station that covers the eastern part of the United States. And he's there in his bedroom where he used to listen to New York radio stations, and I'm doing that. In the matter of 6 years, that's how I hope this inspires someone. That's how quickly you can turn your life around. You really can if you get a focus. And I think part of it was I got away from him. I felt free to be me. God, that sounds corny, but I did. I didn't have the heaviness that the family had back then, and I could get some shit done. But in 6 years, I went from absolute write 'em off poverty to being in a suite of hotels in London, England, where the Queen had her antique show every year, and the old man is back there listening to this with a cigarette in his mouth late at night.
Do you know what's hard? And what you just described is the perfect example. When you're a kid, you understand that in some instances, the only way forward for you is to break away. Like you have to leave or you're not going to make it. And
Right.
then you become a parent, and the thought of your children feeling that way absolutely shreds your soul. Because what you wanted was to not recreate a dynamic where your children felt that the only way that they could get enough air into their lungs was to leave you behind. And that is unfortunately just the truth of being a person. The same drive that you had to escape, your kids may feel, or one of your kids may feel. And boy, does it tear your heart right out of your chest
Well, what you
when
really
you
want is
have a
something
kid
that is in
that needs to go.
between what I described and a child that is too attached. And I think that can be a situation. I'm not a psychologist, but I know of, and you do too, some people that just could not get out of the nest. The world scared them, or the idea of a relationship with one other person, or a variety of people scared them, and so they stayed in the damn nest, and they became the baby forever. You don't want that is worse, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
ideally, right? You're right in the middle, but
Yeah,
you never imagine that your own children will feel that same choke desperation to break free of you that you once upon a time felt. It's a
you want them to
hard
have some of it, though. You do. You want them to leave
some
and
of it,
cleave. You know, you,
some
you,
of
you
it.
want them out the door because that bird's got to fly away, right?
Um, you know, and I think it's different for men. I think,
It
men
is.
and boys and their fathers, it's a very different thing than it is for daughters and their fathers, although there's a ton of evidence and data pointing to just how much damage and chaos it causes for a girl and a young woman to have an absent father or a cold and punitive father. I mean, we're not even
Hmm.
getting into like actual, stuff you would characterize as abuse. We're just talking about styles of parenting. There's so much data that shows how very, very dangerous it is, for girls to have those kind of father relationships.
Sure.
And so I think that for men, you look at your father, and then fathers probably look at their sons in a way that's so different. Like you look at your dad and you're like, I'm not going to live your life, old man. I've got bigger, different plans. I'm not going to be like you. And then your dad looks at you and went, you know what? Good for you, Bobby. You did it. You did it different. You did something different. I mean,
Well, it was
that's something that you get to
interesting.
hold.
Yeah. It was interesting that after I became a little more successful and I got my first house, he approached me and said, there's a lake between where we live. We lived at that point a couple of hours apart. Why don't we get a house there together, like a lake house? And, you can use it and I can use it and you have your friends come over and blah. And I said, I don't think I want to do that.
I
I
bet you
just
regret
did.
that.
I don't know. I did not want to be pulled back into something with him. I went on vacations with my family, with my father, and that was very nice. You know, I tried to pay my own way. He flew me to Florida once as an adult to be with them. Um, but the idea that there was going to be like a little family uh, lake house, I don't know. I couldn't do it. I was just worried that down the road something would fuck up.
And
And
you'd end up carrying it. You'd
yeah,
end up
yeah,
carrying the weight of it.
right.
Yeah, I can't we've talked about it before, like I don't have a single memory. I can't go back to any point in my life where I wasn't scared absolutely shitless of my father.
Yeah.
Absolutely scared to death of him. So I don't have any kind of frame of reference for like daddy's little girl. And my pup, he died. He was so important to me, but he died when I was 12 in an accident. So he was gone. And then I turned around and I recreated some terrible things in my own life, and now my daughters have to live with that. And so that's been really difficult. And it's sometimes, in my dark, sleepless nights, I think about like, but there are so many good dads out there, like Max's dad is such a good dad.
Sure, there are.
And so many good
I
dads,
think there are way more than bad ones. I think
and
there
a,
are way more. Not perfect. I mean, to find that one guy that is like right out of the movies, the Tom Hanks sort of character, uh, they're probably few and far between. But it's a hard life, and it's hard to be a father.
it's really
Um,
hard. It's hard to be a parent. Period. You're
it
just
is.
the pressure on you to provide, just for starters, and then to have all of these emotional and psychological skills that you're just expected to have when they put the baby into your arms. At the hospital, you're like,
Hmm.
there are no classes for this that we took.
Hmm.
I guess it was maybe 4 or 5 nights ago. I woke up in the middle of the night and was trying to decide if I was awake, like, old movie awake, or just a little bit awake. And I was lying there and I thought, if I could choose right now between having $1 million and having my family be okay, I would choose my family.
Oh
But
yeah.
the truth of it is that you also have to accept that you're not really going to be able to get either one of those, because the way that the cards were dealt, you're just doing the best you can. You're not
Well, you
going to,
can't control it either. I mean,
yeah, it's not just you,
right.
right? It's not just you. So that was an interesting realization, because, in the past I would have thought, well, give me the $1 million and then I'll figure out how to fix the other.
Hmm.
But I'm old enough now to know that, well, $1 million isn't going to fix that. And you're not going to get either one. So hopefully this isn't one of the big wake ups. But Bob, listening to you talk about your dad, it makes me think there's a classic Springsteen song. I'm trying to remember what album it's on.
The
It's on
river.
the river. It's on the river. It's called Independence Day. And he wrote this for his father about their relationship. Let's listen. So I heard Springsteen interviewed by David Remnick, who the New Yorker magazine has a podcast called the New Yorker Radio Hour, And it's interesting. It's like different every single time. And I heard David Remnick, the editor, interviewing Springsteen, and they were on stage in front of a live audience. I think it was right around when Bruce was performing on Broadway. And they were talking about, it was a fantastic interview, and they were talking about all sorts of things. And they talked for a very long time about Springsteen's relationship with his own dad, which was extremely difficult. It reminds me, as I was listening to it, I thought, my God, this sounds like Bob and his dad. Bruce's dad was a hardworking guy, but he came from a certain moment in time and a certain place. And that was how he understood and made sense of the world. And then he has this kid who's, a poet and a storyteller and a musician and a rebel and just unwilling and unable to go in lockstep and do things that made sense to the elder Mr. Springsteen. And so that whole song takes place late at night when everyone else is asleep, and the father and son are at the kitchen table talking. And in the morning, the son is leaving home for good. And it's this last desperate attempt to understand each other. It's an incredible song about a father and son and a difficult relationship. And even to this day, this stuff with his dad, it comes up over and over again in Springsteen's work. It's a thing that you maybe don't ever make peace with. And he talked a little bit about being a father himself, and, how, as with every year that passes, like, he understands his dad in a different way. He sees him through a different part of the prism. And it just seems like the perfect baby boomer, greatest generation, father, son kind of a song, because it really gets at that. It gets at that. I recognize that once upon a time you were young and hungry and filled with dreams, and now you're here. And you want me to be okay. And that means making some choices that are safe, that make sense to you. But I'm your son, and I'm young and hungry and filled with dreams. And I can't make those safe choices. It's a really powerful song.
Yeah, I know this song too. The other song he does that is interesting with a father is the one, Take a Look at Your Hometown.
Yeah, My Hometown, which is on Born in the USA, I think.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Well, listen, happy Father's Day. It's complicated.
Let me speak to everyone out there that doesn't have a dad. Maybe your kids don't really have much in the way of a dad, and you're just doing the best you can. That's all you can do, is the best you can. Mm-hmm. There are things that life isn't a movie or a song, man. Things don't get served up fairly or equally, and at the end of it, all you really can say is, well, I did the best I could with what I had.
Right.
And I recognized that everyone around me was trying to do the same.
And so you have some forgiveness along the way. Thank you, folks. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers.
And all the men who step up and act as in the role of a father. Yep. Have a wonderful Father's Day to all the dads out there. New episodes of the Oddcast every Monday and Friday. Our website is BOBANDSHERI.com. We love to hear from you. You can reach us that way, or you can download our app for free in Google Play and the Apple Store and shoot us a talkback message. Just tap the little microphone. And, of course, you can hit us up on all the socials. Let's let Bruce take us out, y'all. Happy Father's Day.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the Bob and Sheri podcast and the Bob and Sheri Oddcast. We would love if you would subscribe, rate and review, and share it with a friend on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you go. And thank you again for listening.